centuries, alchemists promised and failed to transform lead into gold. But that's not the surprising part. What is surprising is that after each debunking, they would manage to repeat the same promise and convince even more people. It would always come with a new salesman and some flashy new jargon, always designed to dupe yet another group of people who had dreams of gold. Today's alchemist in chief, the Liberal Prime Minister, promises to transform deficits into investments. This is not a new promise. It is exactly the same one that Justin Trudeau ran on in 2015. Remember, he said the budget would balance itself. Now, to be fair to him, we all thought it was just a gaffe. What he actually meant was that deficit spending would spark investment, which would grow the economy, generating enough money for, well, the budget to balance itself. The current Prime Minister had a slightly more sophisticated sounding, but similar idea, which is spend less and invest more. But given that he's now taken office and accelerated the spending, doubled the debt, doubled the deficit, it is now time for us to consider the actual results. So what actually happened, Mr. Speaker? Well, since the Liberal government took office, the debt has doubled, growth has stalled, investment has fallen, the budget did not balance itself, and, of course, lead did not become gold. Let's look at the facts. The core facts, Mr. Speaker, are these. Under this government, Canada has had the single worst growth in investment per capita of any country in the G7. In fact, as the member for Newmarket Aurora will tell you, with whom I'm splitting my time, in fact, the reality is that if you take total investment divided by the number of workers in Canada, we get about $15,000 in investment per worker. Barely half of the $29,000 in the United States, and a third lower than the $24,000 across the OECD. The result has been that we have had the worst per capita GDP growth in the G7. And dressing up these deficits in a banker's suit has not made any difference, because since this Prime Minister took office, doubling the deficit, that is the rate at which we add new debt, we've actually seen investment drop by $54 billion, and just the other day he promised that his policies would drive another $1 trillion out of this country into the United States, proving once again the result that deficits do not equal investment. Now, why is this? Well, there are a number of reasons. First, everything comes from something. So there are only two ways for governments to run deficits: print it or borrow it. If they print it, they cause inflation, which drives up interest rates, which drives down investment. If they borrow it, they have to borrow it from somebody. So they borrow it out of the private economy to put it into the government economy, which means the money that has been borrowed away from private investors is no longer available for productive investments in factories, mines, pipelines, new technology, or other income-generating assets. In other words, when government runs deficits, it does not create net economic activity. It simply shifts the activity away from productive private sector activity towards unproductive bureaucratic inactivity. Mr. Speaker, they move the money from where it is efficient to where it is inefficient. Second reason, by the way, that is called the crowding out effect. It is well known that this happens, and that is why deficits have coincided with drops in investment in most countries around the world. The second reason is that today's deficits are tomorrow's taxes, and everybody knows that. So what do businesses and individuals do when they see governments racking up massive deficits? They hoard their cash, waiting for the eventual tax bill. We saw this during COVID, when you would talk to small businesses who would say, with all this debt, I'm holding onto my wallet because I know that a big tax hike is coming. And they put the money under their bed. They don't invest it. They don't spend it. They wait for it to be taxed away later on. This is what economists call the Ricardian equivalent, and it proves very much that there is no net economic activity that results from government deficits. In fact, it only subtracts because it subtracts from the productive investments that people might otherwise make but are suspended into terror that they will have a future tax liability and therefore do not make those investments at all. What we have seen is that when you cut deficits, you actually increase investment. Governments across Canada slashed deficits in the 1990s. We saw a resulting boom. The greatest example of all is Israel. Back in the 90s, Israel was running massive deficits, which required the government of that country pay out 6% yields on their bonds. So investors could, in a very lazy way, simply buy government bonds instead of taking risks on productive investments, and that led to poor economic growth. When they started to cut the deficits and, in fact, balance their budget, the investors no longer could lend to the government. And so they had to invest in productive assets. This caused a boom in startups to the point where Israel now has the single highest density of high-tech companies in the world. They have more companies, for a country of 10 million people, has more companies listed on the NASDAQ than all of Europe combined, a continent with 75 times more people. By cutting deficits, you force investors to invest in productive assets like technological booms that we saw in Israel. The reason, the Prime Minister will say he can get a better return on investment with his government-made investments in big economic projects. But the question is this, two questions. If the projects you want to invest in, if they are money losers, why would the government want to invest in them? If they're money makers, why would the government need to invest in them? If a project is going to lose money, then going forward with it makes us all poorer. If it is a mega project, it makes us a lot poorer. The logic of going ahead with massive projects that lose money is like the businessman who says, I lose money on every single sale, but I make it up on volume. Mr. Speaker, we don't need money-losing projects. We need money-making projects. But by having the fastest permits in the OECD, getting rid of the capital gains tax on reinvestments, having lower marginal taxes on our highest achievers. In other words, the government needs only to get out of the way. Stop telling us you're going to turn deficits into investment or lead into gold. All they need to do is get out of the way and allow Canadians to dig the beautiful gold mine that is right under our feet in Canada.